back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. So it's time for a semi-regular feature when I'm going to be discussing news stories regarding the arts. And here to help me do this, I'm joined by the writer, broadcaster and historian David Oldroyd Bolt. Thanks for joining me, David. So I want you to start by talking about the concerns over the scholarly study of music. What's happened?
Well, this is off the back of an article in the Times Higher Education Supplement by Professor Ian Pace. Ian Pace is a pianist of great renown, specialising in the modern repertoire, and he's also Professor of Music at City University, London. He's written a piece that says that now less than 20% of music degrees taken in this country actually study music. That is to say, they study harmony, they study theory, they study all the things that make up what you might call the grammar and the literature of music and serious performance practice. And that nearly 80% of it now is in pop-based music studies or in ethnomusicography or in other areas that are essentially, I would say, a branch of sociology, not really of serious musical study.
Right. So why has that happened? Is this another example of the kind of way that this sort of ideology relating to group identity has sort of crept into various academic disciplines?
Well, I think it's happened for two reasons. One is that since the 1990s there's been a rise of what's called the new musicology, which argued that the old-fashioned, as they would put it, study of the basics of minims and crotchets and semiquavers and quavers and how you make chords and how you write a melody was formalism, was essentially an old-fashioned white way of thinking about music. And alongside this rose the idea that all musics, as they insist on pluralising everything, are equal. That is to say that there is no difference between the banging on a stone that you might find in a prehistoric society and a symphony of Beethoven or a nocturne of Chopin. And it's drawing of a false equivalence, I should say, that has at an academic level become now a mania.
Well, is it a mistrust of this idea, a kind of mistrust of elitism, I suppose? Because, you know, I like pop music as much as anyone else, but I do recognise that the pop music I enjoy is not Brahms. You know, I know the difference, and I don't think that's offensive to pop music to say that it's not high art. Right?
Well, I think, thank God for pop music, that it's not Brahms, one of the dreariest composers ever to write. But I think it's more that they're trying to say that the worth of knowledge of the basics of music is in fact no worth at all.
Yes.
And that a great many music degrees over the recent years have been towards vocational things like teaching primary school instruments, which requires practically no knowledge of either the instrument or of theory or practice, and towards basically things that actually require no testable, no provable knowledge. These are all sort of ideas-based, but not knowledge-based, which we see in a great many humanities subjects now.
Yes, I mean, it's also creeping into schools, into even a primary school level. Catherine Burbelsing, the headmistress of Michaela School, was talking about her concern when there was this idea that on music courses the kids should study Stormzy rather than Mozart, because they were suggesting that black children couldn't possibly enjoy the work of a white composer. And that's quite patronising and, dare I say, a little bit racist.
I think it's quite a lot racist to suggest that, given that we, over this prom season, we've heard the work of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who's a really rather wonderful black composer, and of many others, by the way, who are being discovered and promoted by the BBC Proms. I know it's not everybody's favourite thing. The Proms is a great season, and I encourage everybody to go. No, the point is that there is this soft bigotry of low expectations, that people from deprived backgrounds, whether that be white or black, that people from different traditions couldn't possibly listen to classical music, to use the broader term,
yes,
and enjoy it because it's not something with which they relate. Well, look, nobody comes out of the womb relating to anything.
Yeah.
We are a tabula rasa, we are a blank slate. You relate to it because you find it emotionally moving. And then if you're so minded, you go on and study it. This is what happened to me as a 3-year-old pianist. I heard Beethoven and thought, this is wonderful, and went and studied it. And equally, when I hear something of pop, for instance, whether it's rap, whether it's garage, whether it's drill, whether it's rock, whether it's blues, if I like it, I'll go and find out more about it. That is regardless of age, regardless of sex, regardless of race. And I think what's happened in a lot of universities, and this was happening at my time as an undergraduate between 07 and 11, was that this intense specialisation, this idea that you had to move towards an idea that was essentially, as I said earlier, sociological rather than musical, was gaining pace. And now it seems, as we see from the latest statistic, to be the majority.
It's so reductive, isn't it? The idea that I can connect to Mozart because of the colour of my skin makes no sense. I've got nothing in common with Mozart.
Well, you don't even speak German.
No, exactly. There we go. So now let's move on. There was another story that you wanted to talk about relating to arts developments at the moment. What's this?
Well, this is the Sunday Times running with a story this morning that the numbers of children studying A-level, French and German has dropped precipitously. In the case of German, it's dropped half in recent years. What that story failed to point out was that language study in schools at GCSE and A-level is at a higher number than it's been forever.
Oh.
The number of children studying Mandarin in the past 3 years has quadrupled.
Right.
The numbers studying Urdu, Punjabi and Spanish have gone through the roof.
So it's just these specific languages?
Yes, and there was a rather boring and utilitarian slant to this, that, well, you know, maybe it's not such a bad thing because we've got Google Translate now, so who needs to study languages? And I think it's rather typical of the debate that goes on, particularly, I'm afraid to say, under Tory governments, about language learning, about the humanities in general, from a dull utilitarian point of view. Why bother with it?
Why is that so often the Conservative Party and Conservative politicians have this tendency of sort of dismissing the arts, or at least playing the arts down, on the basis that they're a kind of luxury? They're not going to earn you much money, and therefore they're not as important as STEM subjects.
Well, a pessimist might say it's because their children are having it at independent schools anyway. And somebody else might say, well, it's because they're constantly at war with the arts sector, with the humanities as a body, and therefore, if they can reduce the number of people going into it by reducing the study of it, you know, that to me, again, is a rather pessimistic view. I simply think to a lot of people on the right, that what matters is the economy, what matters is growth, because that makes people's lives better.
Yes.
That's fine. But when you've made people's lives better, if they have nothing to enjoy, what has been the point of it? And this is a rather Ruskinian argument from the 19th century that, yes, as you get better, as you have more money, you should also be able to have a broader hinterland, to be able to enjoy arts and culture. And to me, the meaning of language learning is to be able to understand how other people think.
Well, we don't have a great reputation internationally when it comes to...
Well, we did. We did.
Used to,
I mean,
right?
we had you think of Anthony Eden, who got a double-starred first in languages, was fluent in Arabic and Persian. Fine, Churchill spoke rudimentary French, but still managed to make himself understood. And it was a requirement of the Foreign Office until relatively recently that you had to speak perfect French and German, plus a classical language, plus an Eastern language.
So what went wrong?
What went wrong was, on the one hand, the closing of the Foreign Office language school in the Middle East.
Yes.
So basically all of that knowledge of Arabic and Persian went, and it's very difficult now to find people in the Foreign Office who have a good grasp of Arabic, Persian, Mandarin, never mind more tricky languages like Kyrgyzstan, for instance.
Yes.
The other thing that's happened, I think, is that it's become a rather combative political football, as you mentioned earlier, that people on the left say, well, we should have more of this sort of thing because it produces more people like us, and people on the right, as a knee-jerk, say, no, we shouldn't, it'll produce more people like them.
Yes, yes. Is there anything in the elimination of Greek and Latin at schools as well? I know Compton Mackenzie wrote that he thought was the signal that the British Empire would decline, and it did coincide.
Yes, of course, but this was something that was argued about, don't forget, in the late 19th century, and particularly with the passage of the 1878 Education Act, which made everybody up to 13 go to school. There was the idea, well, fine, keep it in the public schools because, you know, they're turning out diplomats and people like that, but really do everyday people need to learn Greek and Latin, which I think
doesn't it inculcate a respect for the past, a respect for a different way of life?
Oh, more than that, it's just good for your brain. If you can construe a sentence of Greek, I mean, Latin is slightly easier because it works on more formal structures. Greek is extraordinarily difficult. If you can do that to however rudimentary a degree, your brain has a greater plasticity, and your mind, I think, is more able to think in non-linear ways, in lateral ways. But aside from that, these are some of the most extraordinary works of literature ever produced in Greek and Latin. Why would you not want to understand them in the original? To think how Herodotus thought, to think how Cicero thought.
Absolutely.
And in French and German, I should say it's the same, because so much of the Western canon of music, going back to our first discussion, contains text in French and German, and if you can't understand that beyond a basic Google translation, you're cutting yourself off from half of what makes that beautiful.
And none of this needs to be elitist, does it? This can be something that can be open to all.
It should be, and I think this is, if we had a truly brilliant education movement in this country, of people who cared about education in the broadest sense, not merely in the narrow technocratic utilitarian sense of exam results, that's what we'd have. Unfortunately, it's an unpopular thing to do because there is always someone else screaming for money. So if you suggest that every child has the right to learn Greek, Latin, French and German from 5 until 18, you'll be told, well, what about STEM subjects? Well, look, who needs it? Children are brilliant at picking up new technology for themselves, and they move far faster than any education curriculum can keep up with. So why not concentrate in schools on doing that which is, to a degree, universal and immutable, and leave the technology to those who are best at doing it, the younger generations?
OK, well, David Alderbright, that's really great. I hope you come back. We can talk more about these kinds of issues. I'll forgive you for your Brahms comment. You hate him, do you?
No, I just find him tedious. Really, quite turgid.
Even the German Requiem?
Yes. There is one piece of Brahms which is wonderful, the Handel Variations, Opus 22 for piano.
There we go. We've reached a compromise. David Althorp-Bolt, thank you very much indeed.